Dr. Osama Miyata, an associate professor from the University of Shizuoka, an expert in the study of the modern politics of the Islamic world. Professor Miyata has just returned from the border with Turkey and Iraq. Professor, welcome back to 44 Minutes.
Good to be here.
Of course, we reported on your activities last week that you sent to us by email, but it's great to have you in the studio in person. Now, since the collapse of the Hussein regime, Baghdad has been in a state of anarchy and looters are rampant in the city. The U.S. forces do not have much scope to maintain order in the city, and local people have already started to complain about this situation. The current situation in Baghdad may lead to more problems in the future, so how do you view this chaotic state of the city?
Most of Iraq's major cities, including its capital Baghdad, are occupied by the U.S. and the British Army. There is little information about how bad the security in Iraq is, but it seems the U.S. Army is not serious about maintaining the security in Iraq. I saw the U.S. soldiers ignoring people looting on TV. I guess that the U.S. has some intentions regarding the looting by the Iraqi people. The U.S. Army is carrying out fighting, but its soldiers are always frightened by the sudden attack by the Iraqi people. So the U.S. wants orders. So the U.S. wants other countries to get involved in maintaining the security and sending policemen to Iraq. In other words, the U.S. wants to concentrate on its military activities. On the other hand, British Army is serious about establishing order over the cities, such as Basra. If the U.S. has intentions of becoming a liberator, it must be serious about maintaining security. Iraqi people are looting, giving the impression that the U.S. Army is not a liberator, but has brought about a new disorder in Iraq.
The United States has announced its plan for the interim government of Iraq and its willingness to take a leadership role in the post-war reconstruction process. The United States is also considering to control oil in Iraq to secure funds for reconstruction. It claims it is only natural for the United States that liberated Iraqi people to take a central role in the process, but what do you think of their view?
Well, it is somewhat arrogant idea. I went to Turkey in the beginning of April. Many Turkish people said the U.S. is carrying out war on Iraq because it wants the Iraqi oil. This idea is shared by many Muslims in the Islamic world. Even Osama bin Laden said the U.S. fought the Gulf War in 1991 because of its intention on oil. The U.S. will be engaged in the post-war rehabilitation of Iraq, but it is connected with economic interests. Actually, the U.S. oil company, Halliburton, has got a contract of extinguishing the fire of oil fields in Iraq. Vice President Mr. Cheney was the head of that company, so one can know the U.S. intention of the war on Iraq. U.S. has been advocating democratization in Iraq and other Middle Eastern countries. However, democratization is the Western idea and not rooted in the Middle Eastern culture. Enforcement of such Western system will cause anti-U.S. feeling in the Middle East. The U.S. has been supporting the authoritarian regimes and the dictatorships in the Middle East.
Well, President Bush said to Prime Minister Blair that he expects the United Nations to play a vital role in reconstructing Iraq. Now, what does he mean by that? Because, in other words, how much does the United States expect from the United Nations?
There are discrepancies among European countries before the war. Britain has been supporting the U.S. war on Iraq. Prime Minister Mr. Blair supported the U.S. because he wanted to increase the British influence in European politics, so he needed U.S. support. Now Britain is trying to improve its relationship with other European countries, such as France, Germany, and Russia. That's why Mr. Blair is advocating the UN involvement in the post-war rehabilitation. On the other hand, the U.S. is trying to monopolize the post-war rehabilitation activities in Iraq. As I told you before, the U.S. intentions are connected with its economic interests, such as oil in Iraq. European countries are very much cautious about such U.S. intention. Of course, European countries such as France and Russia want to obtain oil concessions in Iraq. So there are some clashes of interests between the U.S. and the European countries. European countries cannot acknowledge the U.S. monopoly of Iraqi oil.
As a scholar of the study of international politics, how do you feel about the responsibility of the United Nations in reconstructing Iraq and what Japan should do now?
Yeah, the UN should play a leading role in the rehabilitation program after the war. The UN is an important organization for maintaining peace in the international community. The Bush administration ignored the role of the UN opening war against Iraq. Of course, the U.S. cannot maintain the peace all over the world. Iraqi people are very suspicious about the U.S. intention about the war in Iraq. Some Iraqi people said the U.S. is carrying out a war for oil in Iraq. Again, this sentiment is shared by many Iraqi people. In addition, the U.S. Army killed many Iraqi citizens, so hatred against the U.S. Army has become strong. It is very difficult for the U.S. Army to govern Iraq. The U.S. Army is heretics army in Iraq. Muslims don't like the heretics military intervention in the Islamic world. People were delighted with the collapse of Saddam Hussein's repressive government. And they have some hope the UN economic sanction will be lifted and their lives will be much improved. Iraqi people have been suffering the economic disaster after the Gulf War. Muslims don't like the heretics governing of Islamic world. So Japanese government should suggest that Arab countries should play a leading role in post-war rehabilitation under the framework of the UN. It will be welcomed by Iraqi people. Japan should support such Arab countries' activities financially and send necessary personnel to support the Arab countries' activities. In a short time, Japan should send the medicine and the food to Iraq immediately. In the long term, Japan should make a contribution to restore the social and economic infrastructures such as roads and administrative buildings.
Last week, the leaders from France, Russia, and Germany who were against the war in Iraq gathered in St. Petersburg. They appealed to the United States by saying that the international community that was divided before the war should now work together to reconstruct Iraq. What are your thoughts on their actions?
Yeah, European countries such as France, Germany, and Russia are very cautious about U.S. unilateralism. It is dangerous for the stability of the international community. In order to change the U.S. policy, the international community must cooperate, giving an isolated feeling to the U.S. If the U.S. realize no other countries cooperate with the U.S., the U.S. might change its policy towards the Middle East. France, Germany, and Russia are politically very important in the international community. It is favorable for the international community that those countries unite to check the U.S. policy.
The United States planned to hold a meeting for the interim government on April 12th, but postponed it until the 15th. It seems some Iraqi anti-government people are refusing to attend the meeting. So who are the Iraqi anti-government people and where are the bases of their activities?
Yeah, the U.S. is trying to establish a democratic government in Iraq. However, it is a very difficult task. Iraq is composed of various ethnicities and religious sects. Fair distributions of power and economic resources are necessary to create a stable government. The U.S. government is bringing U.S. personnel to the top of the Iraqi government. Mr. Chalabi is said to be one candidate for the head of the Iraqi government. He was a banker and an inexperienced politician. In addition, he is said to be a pro-Israel person. so he may not be accepted by Iraqi people. The U.S. is said to be considering Nizar al-Hazraji as the head of the government. He was the head of the Iraqi army in 1980s. He had some popularity among the Iraqi military officials, but he is suspected to be involved in the chemical weapons attack on Kurdish people in 1988. The U.S. is criticizing the Iraqi position of weapons of mass destruction, and it is the pretext of the war on Iraq. So the U.S. position is very contradictory. I think that Mr. Charabi and Mr. Hazraji will not be trusted by Iraqi people. People will be conscious that the U.S. brought such people. This consciousness will bring instability in the Iraqi politics. It seems that there is a power vacuum and disorder, such as looting in Iraq. So immediate establishment of new authority or the government is definitely needed in Iraq. The international community must support the establishment of a new Iraqi government. The U.S. Army is seen as the heretics army from the Iraqi people and the Islamic world. So Iraqi people cannot welcome the U.S. Army's domination in Iraq. Islam justifies the war against the outside power which invades the Islamic world. The U.S. began the war on Iraq without any clear evidence of the Iraqi position of weapons of mass destruction. President of Azhar University of Cairo in Egypt, Tantawi, said that Iraq has a right to carry out a holy war against the U.S. and the British Army. He's a moderate Islamic priest and a scholar, not an Islamic radical. So this feeling is shared by many Muslims in the Islamic world. Let's see the example of Afghanistan. The U.S. has been advocating the democratization of Afghanistan after the Taliban government. However, the reality in Afghanistan is quite different and far from democracy. The provisional government led by Hamid Karzai is governing only Afghanistan's capital, Kabul. The local areas are dominated by various warlords. The U.S. doesn't seem to establish a democratic government seriously enough. Disorder, robbery, and looting are seen in Afghanistan. The security conditions are worsening there. It seems that Afghanistan is becoming a forgotten country again. The U.S. is planning that its army will govern Iraq for 3 months. After this period, Iraqi people will govern Iraq. It seems very difficult to establish stability and democracy in a war-torn country in such a short time.
So what do you believe is the most important issue right now in order to reconstruct Iraq?
The U.S. must make efforts to stop fighting as soon as possible. The international community, such as UN and Japan, should support Iraqi people immediately enough after the fighting. There is a scarcity of water, food, medicine, and electricity in Iraq. Medical teams have to be dispatched to Iraq as soon as possible. The UN's World Food Project has been sending food to Iraq for 7 years. So UN has confidence among the Iraqi people. The restoration of after-war Iraq should be carried out within the framework of the UN. While the U.S. will seek economic interests in Iraq, such as in the fields of the oil industry, it cannot commit to restoration of Iraq. As I told you before, because the U.S. Army killed many Iraqi people, there is a strong hatred against the U.S. in Iraq. It is so dangerous for the U.S. personnel to carry out relief activities.
And Japan has been saying that it will assist Iraq in the fields of civil, medical, humanitarian, and infrastructure. In order to contribute to the stability of Middle East and the people of Iraq, what should Japan do?
Japanese government is considering dispatching the National Defense Forces to Iraq. It is not the right policy. Japanese government supported the U.S. and the British attack on Iraq. I'm afraid that Japan is regarded as an enemy country by Iraqi people. The National Defense Force is seen as heretics army like the U.S. Army. So it is dangerous for the National Defense Force officers to enter Iraq, carrying out relief activities. Japan should send civilians such as doctors, nurses, policemen, and so on. Policemen are necessary to maintain security there. After security is well maintained, Japan should consider building of schools and hospitals. In doing so seriously, Japan's assistance should be appreciated by many Iraqi people. Otherwise, Iraqi people will continue to have ill feeling against Japan. In order to stabilize the Middle East, the international community, including Japan, should contribute to the promotion of the Middle East peace process. The Palestinian issue is the crucial background for the growth of the Islamic radicals. So the international society, including Japan, should make efforts towards the fair solution of the Palestinian issue. I guess the Bush administration has been neglecting the Palestinian issue. In addition, the international community, especially advanced countries such as Japan, should support the Islamic countries economically and promote investments in those countries to reduce the poverty in the Islamic world. The poverty is the cause to produce the members of the Islamic radical groups. Furthermore, the international conference regarding the post-war rehabilitation of Iraq should be held. The Islamic countries, the Western countries, and the Asian countries should participate in it. The international community should deepen the understanding of what is necessary for the rehabilitation and should seek the international cooperation. We should cooperate for the post-war rehabilitation of Iraq as much as possible. We need to think about the conditions of the Iraqi people, and we must improve the living conditions to bring about stability there. We can cooperate in many fields. War is not an effective means to bring about peace and stability in the Middle East, although President Bush is advocating democratization in the Middle East by force. It is a wrong idea. We can cooperate regarding the post-war rehabilitation in Iraq. If we fail, the Islamic radicals will prevail.
Well, Professor Miyata, as always, thank you very much. You get frequent flyer miles in countries that most people would not visit of late, Afghanistan and, of course, around Turkey and Iraq. But as always, thanks for